I think that this is the world in which we live today is the one that tells us kind of we have to be everywhere all at once. And I think that that is one of the biggest detriments. And what I'm glad that I did, and what I think worked the best for the business, was concentrating on one platform at a time and getting a plan, figuring out how to get traction.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a bi-weekly podcast with information on independent business victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Holly Wade, NFIB's Research Center Executive Director, filling in as guest host for Adam Temple. If you've ever wondered how to create more of a social media following or how you should start using social media for your small business, we're here to help. Our guest, Jamie Troll, will provide basic social media tips and strategies to boost your small business presence. Jamie, welcome to the Small Business Rundown.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, this is a perfect topic for me to talk to you about for this podcast with Beth Melito, our executive director in the Legal Center, and I finding you through social media during the pandemic and having that information groupthink with trying to figure out all of those programs that were specific to small business. But starting from the beginning, I thought it'd be a good place for you to just tell us a bit more about how you started your small business.
Absolutely. So I started my small business, it's been over 5 years now since I first started the first iteration of what this eventually became, which was quite different than what it is today. And I never in a million years could have imagined what I do today back then. But such is, the journey of small business. So I had left a corporate career when I had my second child, my daughter, and moved back home to be closer to family and to have a little bit more family help, and didn't really know if I was going to go back into the corporate world. I was a little bit burned out from it. I was in corporate finance for a Fortune 500 company and just kind of wanted a different life. And so I'd always thought about being an entrepreneur. It had always been something on my mind, and it just seemed like the timing worked out really well. So I first started as more of a service-based entrepreneur, like a lot of folks do, because that's the easiest way to get started. And I started helping small businesses, mostly women-owned businesses, kind of just happened that way, with their finances. So I started out as a virtual CFO, helping small businesses. I love the numbers and the strategy side of numbers as it relates to business, which is something that a lot of business owners, and I'm sure many who are listening here today, do not love about running their business. But that's always been my bread and butter. I'm a CPA by background. So then my business kind of evolved over time to be more one that was based in education. And it really was social media that made that happen for me. And again, it was really more accidental than it was on purpose. But now we've learned a little bit more about how to use it a little bit more purposefully. But I started just doing trainings weekly on Facebook to help small business owners with various topics on saving taxes, what entity type should they be, like really trying to understand and educate true small business owners. And it grew and grew and grew. Today, that same group, which is called Financial Literacy for Women Business Owners, has over 40,000 small business owners in it. So I realized pretty quickly that if I was going to stay service-based, I really, I had a long waiting list from people who had found me on social media, and realized that I needed to kind of change my business model if I wanted to help more people. So that's when I really started creating programs and tools for small business owners on a bigger scale and moved away from the one-to-one work I was doing. So that's kind of the progression of the business to where I am today, which also put me in a spot to be able to help people through COVID because I wasn't working one-to-one with clients at the time. And it allowed me to really focus on putting educational materials out there on social media, on YouTube, which honestly is the best way to grow, is by creating content. And I'm sure we'll get to this, but by creating content that's helpful to people that they're really looking for and that is valuable. So that is really what just took my business into a different stratosphere, which is why I say it's completely different than what I ever would have thought I would have been doing today. But such is how this journey goes.
Yes, and to think that it was only 5 years ago that you started, and
Yeah.
it's evolved considerably since then in so many ways. But looking at how you first started using social media, what was kind of the beginning of that journey for you?
Yeah. So in the very beginning, it definitely was Facebook. And that's because that's really, and it was Facebook groups specifically, especially back in, 2018, 2019, groups were really gaining traction at that point. And there wasn't as much as there is now. There wasn't as much of the overwhelm with groups and things as there can be now. But at the time, it was kind of up and coming. And I'd spent a lot of time interacting in Facebook groups, whether it's like a neighborhood group or a mom's group or a business owner group. But I decided that I wanted to create a space that was specifically related to finances and specifically related to small business, where people could turn to find the answers to their questions. Because as much as, maybe we should say, well, they shouldn't turn to social media for their questions, how often do we do that? It's a very common thing for us to do, is to crowdsource answers. And I continue to see in other groups people asking questions about finances and getting not great answers or answers that were a little bit suspect. So I wanted to create a space that was really about getting people access to, the real answers, the real help that they needed. And I even brought in professionals and have preferred vendors that also helped in that group too, to make sure that we were giving good feedback to people and giving good resources back to them to be kind of a more trusted place to go to. If you're going to go to social media, we wanted them to come to us. So that's really how it got started. And I did weekly trainings there, and it just grew on word of mouth. People just invited their friends to the group and said, this place is great. I would, talk about the trainings I was doing in various different places. And so people would join the group just for those live trainings. So I did that. I did live trainings, I think every single Wednesday for close to 2.5 to 3 years.
That is impressive.
Yep. And I did not miss a Wednesday. Like, it had to be Christmas. I think I did one on Christmas Eve one time.
That
I was a little
is
bit obsessive
serious
about it, I'll be
dedication.
honest. You don't have to do that.
So you were familiar with Facebook groups and things like that. And so the transition sounds like it was fairly easy for you to incorporate that into your business. From using Facebook to all of the other social media platforms, how did that evolve? And what steps did you take to figure out what would be best used for your business?
Yeah. And I think that this is the world in which we live today, is the one that tells us kind of we have to be everywhere all at once. And I think that is one of the biggest detriments. And what I'm glad that I did, and what I think worked the best for the business, was concentrating on one platform at a time and getting a plan, figuring out how to get traction. Each platform is different, right? So figuring out how to use it and use it well for your business. It's not about being everywhere at once. It's about being present in a place where people can find you, right? So if you're just kind of scattering things everywhere, trying to be everywhere, but you actually don't end up being anywhere when you do that. And so I think for us, it really was about figuring out, where are we most comfortable? I know a lot of people, when they're getting started, the question can sometimes be, what platform do I start? Is there a platform that's best? And a lot of people will say, go to where your clientele is. And I think that that's good to think about. Like, where are the people that I want to attract? Where are they? But I would also say, especially if you're going to be the one managing it, at least at first, go to where you're most comfortable. What app do you open when, you are sitting down to take a 5-minute break, right? Like, what is the thing that you're going to? Where are you looking for information? Because wherever you're most comfortable, that's going to help you to be able to utilize that platform well. Like I said, I did a Facebook group because I was already in Facebook groups. I understood them. There wasn't a huge learning curve to being able to do that. I knew I kind of had good ideas for how to use it effectively. I'll tell you, when I got over to Instagram, I was not really big on Instagram. I'm still not big on Instagram. Some people do an amazing job at it, but that's not our main focus. And it was a lot more of a learning curve for me, because it just isn't for me that app that, at least at that time, was my go-to. So I think really thinking about, where do you spend your time, and thinking about how you could start there. And then once you get a good plan and you get traction, okay, now I can move on to the next platform and figure out how to use that, and understand that it's not about just posting the same content everywhere, which is what a lot of people do. It's about figuring out what works on each of those platforms and being really specific with what your strategy is for each of those platforms, right?
That makes a lot of sense, because we know that time is of the essence for small businesses, and there's only 24 hours in a day. And so dedicating those hours to the things that you're most familiar with, to at least get you in the social media environment, and then navigating it from there. So do you use Instagram now? Is that one of the components of your social media program?
It is, but it's something that we use a little bit more to interact with previous students. That tends to be a place. So what I'll say we have now is we actually have a document too within my company. And we do try to update it from time to time. But when a new person comes in, at one point I sat down and said, okay, what are we using all these things for? Because we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. We're on, we have a Facebook business page and a Facebook group, right? We are on TikTok now because, why the heck not? We have a website, we have SEO, blogs. What are we using all of these things for? Right. And I think that we don't necessarily sit down and think about that in enough detail. We're really just like, oh, so people can find me. But each of those platforms is a little bit different. And really, it's not just about finding you. What do you want them to do? Like, what do you want that person to do? And how are you going to use the platform to get them to do that thing? So I think that for us was really key to sit down and say, okay, what is the purpose of each of these? And we realized that Instagram for us, we really use it because we like to be able to highlight some of our previous students and customers, right? And to interact with them. It's not as much for us a place where we're trying to find new people, because honestly, yeah, sure, we could find some people who are looking for financial knowledge on Instagram, but it's much more of a visual place, right? So Instagram is just a very, very visual place. So it's a little bit of a different strategy. I think it's great if you're a restaurant and you're showing your food. It's a little bit tougher for me as a financial professional to show finances, right? It's possible, but I personally also don't gravitate towards short form content. And that's really what Instagram and TikTok are all about, which are those little snippets. I am very long winded by nature. It is why you'll probably have to cut me off on this interview at some point, because I could do this for 3 hours. And it's why YouTube is such a big thing. The long form content on YouTube, that's where I feel like I can really teach and get into a topic. So for me, Instagram, it just wasn't the place to be finding new people, but it is a place where we can kind of make sure we're keeping in touch with the people that, we use DMs and things like that, but it's typically going to be with our existing audience that already knows, likes, and trusts us. So we have other places where we're bringing in new traffic. For us, that's YouTube. That's blogs. That's where we're really trying to find the new people. And then our Facebook, especially our Facebook group, is really more about nurturing people who are already kind of in our sphere. We're really trying to nurture them, build that rapport, build that trust building. That's kind of, what the purpose of that group is. So they all have different purposes. And so they all function a little bit differently. And that means the resources and the things we're posting and what we're putting into them is also different, right? Doesn't mean we can't reuse things, but we not in the exact like copy paste type of way.
Sure, that makes sense that with all of these different platforms, looking at each one to see how it fits in your business and how best to utilize them makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So one problem many small business owners have is they don't know where to start when it comes to social media. They might not be familiar with many of the platforms at all, or the platforms that they are familiar with might not fit, as you mentioned, with their business model or what they're trying to do with it. What is the first thing they should do when thinking through the social media plan for their business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things you don't want to overthink because it's just getting started. That's what's going to tell you which way to go. And so trying different things is really a great thing. Even if it's just posting like once a week, post some tip, something you're going to do, a short video, a post, whatever it is, once a week to start testing out the reception to that. And I think that being really able to kind of test and not try to figure it out all ahead of time. I think we want the like perfect strategy, but truth be told, we're going to find the strategy by actually doing. We're going to find what people are interested in by putting things out there. We're going to see what their responses are. Those responses are going to give us more ideas for additional content. I think that there's like a spiral there where once you start doing it, it actually gets easier. But we're trying to make it as easy as possible by like planning everything under the sun ahead of time, but we're not actually getting started. So I'm a really big proponent of just getting in there, getting started, and paying attention to what's working and paying attention to what you're enjoying and what you're not enjoying and giving it some time and having I think that's one of the things I try to do. Anything that I do, I try to do for at least 3 months before I determine whether I'm going to keep doing it, change it, or get rid of it altogether. Because you kind of need to see over that time how it evolves and if it's working. Everything takes time. in these spaces, especially. We know that people can get overnight results, but that isn't the reality for most people. And in fact, overnight results aren't always super helpful for your actual business purpose anyway. Going viral isn't always as great as people seem to think that it is. So just don't be afraid to test and try different things and just, start putting something out each and every week and see where it goes from there.
That's great advice because certainly small business owners trying to get into highlighting their business on social media can be overwhelmed and then paralyzed by all of, what they think that they should do instead of just starting to venture into something, try it out, see if it works, see if it catches, as you said, see if they're having fun with it. And,
Yeah.
if they're enjoying the experience of using the social media platform that they think is of best use for their business. With that, looking at the content that you provide on these different platforms, what are some tips that you might have to small business owners on how to leverage the content or what content, how to think through that whole process?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of just the idea of working smarter, not harder. That is something we're always assessing in the business. Like, where are we making this harder on ourselves than it needs to be? So repurposing is one of those areas where we really do love it, right? It's not necessarily a copy paste, but it is about how do we take this and make it as powerful as it can possibly be. And one of the reasons I start with something like YouTube is because YouTube, I can do one long form something. For some people, maybe that original piece of content, right? You pick your main original piece of content. Maybe it's a live training. Maybe it is a short or a reel. Maybe it's a blog. Maybe it's a newsletter, something that you create first and that you can then use that to create multitude of things off the back of it. So for me, that's a long form YouTube video. And then what we'll do is we will grab little pieces out of it that are really intriguing and we will post them into social media and we'll write specific captions to that social media platform. We'll put them on Facebook. We'll put them into our group. We might add them to Instagram stories, right? With the call to action on what to do next. And that's a really big thing too, is that you can watch all the things, but then if there's no next step, for us, it may be go watch the full video on YouTube with the link, right? Trying to get them to do the next thing. I mean, of course, yes, sure, like and subscribe, great, great, great. But you really capture their attention if you can get them to take the next step. And even better, if that next step is going to your website or getting a free thing that you offer. And that's a really big thing that I advocate for, is not just relying on social media to grow a following, because the algorithms can change all the time. And we are not in control of those things. And you don't own that audience. And also, I have friends that have literally grown these huge audiences, and Instagram thought they were a bot and shut them down. And it took them like a month to get their account back up and running, if they ever did. And so relying on these accounts without having access to those people outside of it, it's really just rolling the die, right? You are hoping things don't change. But the only thing we are certain about in this world is that there will be change. So I'm a big fan of making sure you have a call to action, that you're telling people to do something. And maybe it's something that they can go sign up for your newsletter, get your freebie, something of value to them that you can offer, get a discount, right? A coupon code. If you go to, a lot of social media sites will have those types of things where it's encouraging you to go and use this coupon code to buy this thing on another website. So thinking about what is the purpose of this piece of content and what do I want people to do next? And then you could use those, little snippets of that piece of content in different places and use them for really driving traffic in that way.
That makes a lot of sense. And a good example of a warning in having a following base and having a call to action so that they are, not at the whim of the platform that you're using. If they change their algorithm, and they turn into what the social media platform identifies as a bot, that is the ultimate horror story.
Yep.
And that's a good transition into, in terms of building a community. You mentioned it a bit, but kind of building on that, how do you begin to build those relationships between those who are followers on your social media accounts to customers?
Yes. So I do think, being really relevant to your customers and not focusing too much on going viral, because that's another story. I know I have lots of friends that have a lot more followers than I do. And sometimes it's a result of a video that went viral. But when that video was their dog or their cat and absolutely nothing to do with their business, how is that really helping at the end of the day? And in fact, the way the algorithms tend to work, if you go viral on something that isn't really geared towards your ideal customer, it's going to share your content more with those types of people. So you want to be really clear that your content is, by and large, I mean, you can sometimes put out things that are, a little bit off base or off, off target from your specific business, if they're things to help, your audience get to know you, things like that. But most of your content, you want to be really clear around, what does your business do? Who are you? Because the algorithm is going to learn who to show your content to by that. So that's just something really, I do show, occasional things of, little reels and things, just again, for building that know, like, and trust factor. But the vast majority of our content is related to business finances, how to manage your business finances effectively, things in that niche, because we don't want, our content going to people that has no relevance to our business. So being really clear on what is the strategy, what is the relevance of what you're putting out there, and thinking about too, where the customer is in their journey. And that might differ depending on, what platform you're using. If you're looking on TikTok and things like that, it might be, maybe it's more very, what we call top of funnel, which is they are early on in the journey, or they're not super problem aware. They're just kind of, the tip of the iceberg, as it were. Whereas if they're more aware of the problem, you can be more direct with the solve. And so we like to create content all the way down that funnel. So we have some that's just catching a lot of our pandemic assistance that we did just for free to help business owners, but it did serve as a top of funnel in terms of, well, that we knew those were small business owners, right? And they could be good fits for the rest of our content. But then the rest of our content would focus around being more profitable, saving on taxes, those types of things, to really whittle down to the people that our products were right. So just thinking about where in the funnel, where are the people, and how do you want to create content that speaks to where they are and their awareness of not just their own problem, but their awareness of your solution, right? So how problem aware are they? And then how solution aware, i.e. that you exist, are they? And make sure that the content kind of aligns with that.
That makes sense, being very specific of having your content be directed towards your business so that somebody like me isn't following your really cute cat or dog video.
Yeah.
So how often do you recommend posting? You're on a number of social media platforms. You've grown your business. How do you manage that in looking at the volume of posts that go on social media and how much time you dedicate towards that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I'm a big believer. I know there are a lot of people out there that are specialized in certain platforms and may have certain, again, kind of, rules for that platform, but those rules are ever changing, right? So I could say, like, okay, post 3 reels a day for, 5 days a week or something like that. But again, that is always ever changing. And in my real time, what I have seen in the real world is that it's less about frequency and more about quality, right? And it's, what are you putting out there? Is it helpful to your audience? If that's what you're trying to do, is it going to be engaging with them? I think the exact number, I think it can be overwhelming, right? It can be overwhelming. And what happens then, if we're just focused on the number, the quality goes down just because we're just worried about getting something out there and not getting something meaningful out there. And we actually have recently pulled back on a lot of our social media and said, like, hey, we're doing all this posting, we're not getting the engagement. That's probably because we're just saying something to say something. So how do we get more impactful, maybe less often, things that we're putting out there? So again, we're kind of trying that strategy now to see how that works on the different platforms. So again, I think it's trial and error a little bit. It is always useful to have help. Again, focusing on just one platform at first, is, if it's just you, is going to be really helpful. But I have a team that helps to repurpose the content. So now at this point in my business, I create that main piece of content, and then I don't really touch it other than my team takes it. They'll chop it into little videos. They'll make little posts out of it. They'll do different things. They'll write, the newsletter. I'll review things, but they're actually doing that versus me having to be touching all of it all the time, because honestly, I'm not the best social media manager. I probably am better doing other things than that. So it depends on kind of where you are in your business, but I do think that that's one to get help with. I will say you want to be monitoring it though, right? Because again, the point isn't to just do it to do it. The point is to do it to get results from it. And so if you are doing something for a long period of time, call it 3 to 6 months, and you're not getting results from it, you want to either reassess it, change it, right? You don't want to be paying somebody to do something for you that isn't yielding you a return on investment. So that's kind of the finance side of things, to say, definitely try new things, get out there, but have a purpose. It's not just about, if you're going to hire someone to grow your social media, make sure that it's working. Because a social media strategist, someone who's a marketer, is very different than someone who is just a social media manager. A manager is just posting stuff. A marketer is somebody who's trying to grow it, trying to drive leads to the business, understands, how it fits into the bigger picture. So make sure you have the right person there, that it's not just about putting something out there.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And along with that, when you have all of these different platforms and you have followers, you are inevitably going to receive comments. So how much focus do you have on responding to comments? How do you think through that? Because I can imagine that it can take up a lot of time. And in prioritizing how you interact with customers, where do comments fit into this?
I will say engagement matters, and sometimes engagement matters more. So that's one of the reasons that we've struggled with Instagram, is because I rarely engage on Instagram. And sometimes it's not even just about your posts, but going to other people's, consuming, commenting on their things, really being active on the platform. On YouTube, I get tons of comments underneath all of my videos asking various questions. So what I tend to do for that personally, that works for me, is to try to block off a time, and maybe it's just an hour on my calendar once a week. And I go in and I will just engage. And I will be responding to comments. I do have team members that do it too, if they're more general comments, but I like to respond to the more specific things. So I do still do that, but we don't respond to everything. And sometimes you get mean comments, and so you can kind of ignore those, or I let my team handle those. But most of the time, it's just a matter of being around and being available. And that's where you're going to get some of the know, like, and trust, right? Is the engagement piece. You're not just a billboard, unless that's the purpose of that platform. And that may be, in some cases, just a place for people to go, to have an Instagram link, to have a Facebook link so people can see your business page. But if one of your purposes is around growing the know, like, and trust factor, you're going to want to engage on that platform.
Great. Thank you so much for all these great tips. This is wonderful information for those who have just started out on social media platforms, for those who are beginning, for those who are veterans and just need some, kind of added advice from somebody who's been doing this for quite a while. So thank you again. Before we go, is there anything else you would like to add?
Okay, I have a couple of things. I'm going to tell you all how to find me. One other thing I wanted to point out, just because this took me a little bit of time to figure out, because I kind of lumped all social media together for a long time as far as what the purpose of it was and how to use it. And what I realized at a certain point in time, and this was a big game changer for the business, is that certain platforms, things like Facebook, things like Instagram, things like TikTok, those are going to be things where, for the most part, you're going to create posts that are going to be relevant for maybe 24 to 48 hours. And then more than likely, sometimes, again, you can catch fire and it'll stay around for a little while, but oftentimes there's a shorter shelf life on those things. But there's also kind of, whether you call it social media or not, you've got things like YouTube, you've got blogs and search engine optimization, where on that side of things, the work that you're putting in to make sure you have good keywords, to make sure things are searchable, those are things that can live a lot longer. So I think it's good to have a strategy for both, but they should be kind of separate strategies. And to think about, when we are creating content, again, working smarter, not harder, how do we make that content go farther? And for me, I have videos on YouTube that I did 3 years ago that still generate revenue for us each and every month. And that's incredible. I cannot say the same for Facebook posts, right? So if you're kind of inundated with content in the creation of constant posting and creating content, then I think making sure that you also are incorporating a strategy for those longer term, longer living things that you can create that can continue to work for you. Searchability, it's so great when businesses can show up high in Google results, right? That's going to continue to drive results to your business. Just thinking through that difference, if you haven't yet, and how you might be able to use those platforms a little bit differently, that was a really big game changer for us in the business.
Great. Thank you for your time today, Jamie. Listeners can follow Jamie on her social media platforms. And what are the handles that they can follow you and see how you're using social media?
Absolutely. So first go to my YouTube channel. That's where, again, I'm putting out a video every single week that goes onto YouTube. It's just Jamie Trull, my name, Trull with a U. And then I have my Financial Literacy for Women Business Owners Facebook group. We do have men in there too. It's just the name. Don't let it scare you off. But you can search that up on Facebook and also on Instagram, just as Jamie Trull. My website, jamietroll.com. And just to give an example of, what we're talking about here is driving people to your email list and collecting their information. So for anybody that wants my free guide to reducing taxes for business owners, you can also go to jamietroll.com/tax guide. And that way I can keep in contact with you and send you other things that you might find helpful.
Thanks, Jamie. It was so great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So the resources that Jamie mentioned can be found in the show notes of this episode. And if you have any questions you'd like answered on an upcoming podcast, please send us an email at podcast@nfib.org. Now I want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a small business owner or a supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.